Your mom calls on a Sunday afternoon, the way she does every Sunday afternoon, and about 6 minutes into the conversation, after the weather, after your brother's kids, after whether you've been eating enough vegetables, she asks, the way she's asked in some form for 11 years now, so what exactly is it you do again with the computer stuff? You're standing in your kitchen in Denver, looking out at the mountains you can just barely see from this angle if the light's right, and you give her the answer you always give her. Trading, mom. I do trading. She says, oh, that's nice, in the tone she uses for things she's decided not to worry about, and asks if you're seeing anyone. Where this actually started. You don't tell her the number. You've never told her the number. As of this morning, before she called, the number sitting across your consolidated accounts, the taxable brokerage, the two LLCs, the real estate holdings net of debt, the crypto position you've mostly forgotten to check, was $71.4 million. Your mother, who worked 31 years as a school administrator in Fort Collins and retired with a pension she's proud of, and a paid off house she's prouder of, thinks you do something with computers and the stock market, and has thought that in some vague and unexamined form since you were 24. Where this actually started. You were 22, 3 months out of college with an economics degree you weren't using, working a job you hated at a regional bank doing loan processing, when a guy from your fraternity, Danny Ferro, who you weren't even that close with, who you mostly knew from intramural basketball, invited you to a poker game that turned into, somewhere around midnight, a conversation about options trading. Danny had been doing it for a year, small amounts, mostly losing, but he talked about it with a kind of intensity that stuck with you longer than the actual poker did. You didn't start trading that night. You started 3 weeks later quietly with $4,000 you'd saved from the bank job in an account you opened on your lunch break without telling anyone, including Danny. You lost most of it in the first 4 months, the way almost everyone does, on trades that felt obvious in the moment and looked reckless in hindsight. A leveraged bet on an earnings call that went the wrong way, a position you held too long out of stubbornness instead of thesis. What you didn't do was quit, and what you also didn't do was tell anyone. Not your parents, not your girlfriend at the time, not even Danny, who eventually did quit 6 months in, down about $2,800 and tired of it. You kept the loan processing job during the day and traded in the mornings before work and the evenings after. And by the end of year two, you turned that original $4,000 plus about $11,000 more you'd fed into the account from your salary into something closer to $43,000. Not a fortune, but proof to you that whatever you'd stumbled into wasn't purely luck. You quit the bank job at 24. You told your parents you were taking some time to explore options in finance, which was technically true, and told them almost nothing. Your dad, who spent 28 years as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant and has a specific, deep seated belief that stability is the only real form of success, was quietly worried. He didn't say much about it directly, that's not how your dad operates. But you remember him asking, a few months in, whether you had something to fall back on. A question you understood even then wasn't really about a backup plan. It was about whether you were about to become one of those cautionary stories people whisper about at family gatherings. The years you built it without saying anything. By 26, you'd developed something closer to an actual system, a mix of options, strategies around earnings volatility, and a slower moving thesis driven equity portfolio you held for months or years at a time, funded by profits you kept almost entirely reinvested. You were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Aurora that cost $1,340 a month, driving a 2016 Civic you'd bought used, eating at the same three cheap restaurants in rotation because every dollar you didn't spend was a dollar that could compound instead. Your account crossed $1 million right before you turned 27. You remember the moment specifically, sitting on your apartment floor because you didn't own a couch yet, laptop balanced on a moving box you'd never fully unpacked, staring at the number for a long time without feeling much of anything, which surprised you. You'd expected something bigger. What you actually felt was closer to relief, the specific kind that comes from a hypothesis finally getting enough evidence behind it, that you can stop constantly relitigating whether you made a mistake. You told no one, not your parents, obviously, but also not your friends, not your girlfriend at the time. You'd broken up with her 9 months earlier. Partly, you'll admit privately, because the secrecy around your finances had become its own kind of quiet wedge between you, a thing she sensed you were withholding, even though she never could have guessed the actual scale of what you were withholding. Year after that, your dad asked again, more directly this time, over Thanksgiving, whether you thought about getting something more traditional lined up. And you said you were doing fine, which was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most significant understatements of your entire life. You watched him nod, unconvinced but choosing not to push, and you felt the specific ache of wanting to just tell him, wanting to pull up the account on your phone right there at the dinner table and let the number do the explaining you couldn't manage in words, and you didn't do it. You've never been fully able to articulate even to yourself exactly why. Why you never told them. Here's the closest you've come to an honest answer, turning it over on long drives, on nights you can't sleep. Part of it is genuinely superstitious, an unexamined, almost childish fear that saying the number out loud to your parents would somehow curse it, make it disappear, the way you don't want to jinx a no hitter by mentioning it in the sixth inning. You know, that's not rational. You believe it anyway, somewhere underneath the rational part of your brain. But the bigger part, the part you trust more, is about what the money would do to the relationship if they knew. Your parents raised you and your brother on a combined income that peaked somewhere around $118,000 a year in a modest four-bedroom house they are still in, still paying off slowly, still proud of. Your dad has a specific relationship with money built on decades of careful, incremental saving. He retired with about $340,000 in his 401k, feels genuinely good about that number, worked hard for every dollar of it, and has strong, settled opinions about what financial responsibility looks like. If you told him the real number, you don't think he'd be happy for you, not cleanly. You think some part of him would feel like the decades of careful incrementalism had been, in some sense, the wrong strategy. Not because he'd say that, he never would, but because you know your father well enough to know what silently recalibrating his own life's math against yours would do to him, even if neither of you ever said a word about it. You'd be handing him a comparison he never asked for and can't unsee. There's a smaller, more selfish piece too, one you're less proud of. Some part of you likes being the son they gently worry about, the one who took the risky path and hasn't fully made it in their eyes yet. Because that version of you gets to stay a kid a little longer, gets to still be someone they feel needed by, gets to avoid the specific loneliness that comes with being so far outside your own family's financial reality that you no longer share a common unit of concern with them. Your mother worries about her property tax bill going up $340 a year. You could pay off her entire house from a rounding error in your portfolio's daily movement. Telling her that wouldn't bring you closer. You genuinely believe it would create a distance neither of you would know how to name. The stress test. 2 years ago, your dad had a health scare. Nothing catastrophic in the end, a cardiac episode that turned out manageable, but serious enough in the moment that you flew home to Fort Collins within 6 hours of the call, sat in a hospital waiting room for 11 hours, not knowing what you were about to hear. Somewhere around hour 4, your mother, exhausted and scared and not thinking clearly, mentioned, almost as an aside, the kind of thing people say under stress without weighing it, that they might need to tip into savings for a specific out of network specialist the hospital was recommending, someone with a much better track record for exactly your dad's condition, someone insurance wouldn't fully cover. You could have solved this in the time it took to open your banking app. You almost did. Your thumb was actually on your phone screen, mid transfer before you stopped yourself. Not because you decided against helping, but because you realized, sitting there, that transferring $40,000 anonymously through some workaround, or explaining where it came from, both led to the same unavoidable conversation you'd spent 7 years avoiding. What you did instead was call the specialist office directly, get the actual number, $34,000, out of pocket for the full recommended treatment plan, and then call your mother back and tell her you'd come into some savings from your trading and wanted to cover it. Full stop. No explanation beyond that. Framed as a gift you'd feel honored to give rather than information you were disclosing. You transferred the money that night. Your mother cried on the phone, thanked you in a way that made you feel simultaneously proud and like a fraud, and asked gently how you'd managed to save that much doing the computer stuff. You told her you'd gotten lucky with some positions a few years back and had been saving carefully since. Both technically true, neither remotely close to the actual truth. Your dad, once he was well enough to have the conversation, asked you privately, quieter than usual, whether you were sure you could afford it, whether it would set you back. You told him you were fine. He studied you for a second, the specific look he gets when he's deciding whether to push on something, and let it go. You've wondered since whether some part of him suspects there's more to the story than the computer stuff. You've never asked him directly whether he wonders. You're not sure you want to know the answer. What $71 million actually changes and what it doesn't. Here's the part that surprises you most. Sitting with the reality of your own life at 33. The number changed almost nothing about your daily existence. You still live in a 2-bedroom condo in Denver that cost $410,000, which is a nice place, but not a remarkable one by the standards of what you could actually afford. You still drive a car that's 7 years old. You still call your mother back within a few hours if you miss her call. Still show up for Thanksgiving. Still let your dad explain things to you about home maintenance. You technically don't need explain because you employ people for exactly that because you know it matters to him to feel useful in that specific small way. What the number did change is your relationship to fear in a way you didn't fully anticipate. You no longer worry about a bad trade wiping you out, obviously. The portfolio is diversified enough, sized conservatively enough relative to your total net worth, that even a genuinely disastrous year wouldn't threaten anything structural. But more than that, you no longer worry in the specific way you did at 24 about whether the whole thing was a mistake. That question, the one your dad's careful worry used to needle at every Thanksgiving, has been definitively answered, even though he's never gotten to hear the answer. You've started quietly to build something you can eventually tell them about without telling them everything. A family foundation, structured through a lawyer in Denver named Rosalind Chen, that will fund need based scholarships at the community college in Fort Collins where your mother spent half her career. The kind of fund that can exist publicly, with your name loosely attached, without requiring you to explain the actual size of what's behind it. You think eventually this might be the bridge, a way to let them see some tangible proof that the years of computer stuff amounted to something real, without handing your father a number that would quietly rearrange how he sees his own life's work. The conversation you're building toward, you haven't told them yet. You don't know exactly when you will, or whether you fully will, or whether the version of the truth you eventually offer will be complete or, like most things you've told them for a decade now, technically accurate and substantially incomplete. What you do know, sitting in your kitchen after hanging up with your mother, mountains fading into the evening light outside your window, is that the secrecy has started to feel less like protection and more like a debt of its own, a small, accumulating cost, paid quietly, the same way the money itself accumulated quietly for 11 years while nobody was watching. You think about your dad's face in the hospital waiting room, the specific look of a man trying to do math on a number he doesn't have all the inputs for. You think about the scholarship fund still in its early paperwork stages, still months from actually launching. You think about the fact that you're 33 and your parents are 61 and 63, and the window for the kind of honest conversation you keep postponing is not, in fact, infinite, no matter how much it's always felt that way. You don't call your mother back tonight to tell her you're not ready, and you're honest enough with yourself to know pretending otherwise wouldn't make the conversation better, just earlier and worse. But you open a new note on your phone and you write down for the first time an actual date, 8 months out, after the scholarship fund launches, after a trip you're already planning to take your parents on that you've been quietly funding through a shell explanation about reward points. And you write, tell them then. You don't know if you'll keep that promise to yourself. You've broken versions of it before, quietly, year after year, always with a reasonable sounding excuse. But this is the first time you've written it down, which feels, even to you, like a small and specific kind of progress. Not the truth itself, not yet, but the first real commitment to eventually stop managing the distance between what you've built and what they know about it. The question that's actually yours now isn't whether $71 million changes who you are to your parents. It's whether you'll ever let them find out who you actually became.